Welcome to Regulation Rundown, where we talk all things regulations and all of that,
Yeah.
all that jazz. So what's been going on in the markets? The Davos Summit. We'll talk a little bit about what happened to 50-year mortgages and our mortgage-backed security buyback. You
Mhm.
know, some very exciting stuff.
Yeah, you originally, when you started at Lone Star Atlanta, you said that our sales process was basically throwing spaghetti against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't wrong, but that kind of feels like what the plan to fix the mortgage market is. At
Yeah.
the moment, right? We talked about portable mortgages, 50-year mortgages, buying back mortgages. What else? Eliminating investor groups, and
Yep.
if some of those ideas, if well executed, could be helpful.
Mhm.
But one just feels like overload, and two, I think isn't really addressing the actual problem, which is supply, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I did find interesting, because I was under the impression that investors buy about 0.5%
Yep.
all purchases. They did in 2023.
Okay.
So it seems like that number since then has increased quite sharply,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, for some AI assisted Googling. So I think that number is actually closer to a quarter
Yeah.
in some cases, which is pretty significant, and that is a crazy increase. So there is something there, I think.
100%.
And I know it could be market dependent where they're doing that. So, could be reasons why house general purchasing is slowing down. So, I don't think that's a bad idea in and of itself. And I was interested to know that I was operating under slightly outdated data.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. I'm currently in my house hunting search, and every single Zillow listing says this could be a good investment for first-time home buyers or investors,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the area I'm looking in is a lower cost area and all
Yeah.
of that. So it seems like a lot of these lower income homes are being pitched to investors
Yeah.
as places to turn into rental properties at a higher rent than would be a mortgage. So
Yeah.
instead of us looking at those properties to say, how can we get these lower income borrowers into these homes? Sellers are just
Right.
pivoting to say,
No.
investors want money.
But not
Which I
all
get.
those folks are big corporations, right? There's
Exactly.
people, that are just trying to maybe slowly rent houses as a second source of income, which is a good way of
Having more
getting off.
income.
Yeah. So
Yeah. And I think that's always the tough question, right? Is
Mm.
where's the line between a good faith investor that's willing to
Yeah.
put investments into the community, is maybe more local and all
Right.
of that, versus, the big case with DSCR loans that
Yeah.
happened in Baltimore, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
they're now foreclosing on houses, and there
Yeah.
is problems that we just
Mhm.
don't know that how big that's going to be yet, right?
Yeah. I can see the appeal from the other side. For example, the house next to me just sold. And it was an older woman. She was going into assisted living, and her daughters, who were out of state, were selling the house. We actually were able to. We had a friend of ours write a letter, and they were able to not put the house on market, and they sold that way. But they're a perfect example for an iBuyer, in my opinion, right? Because you don't want to deal with the hassle of listing a home. You don't
Yeah.
want to deal with the hassle of travel. If you could just kind of set it and forget it with an iBuyer, I could see that being super attractive. And now, especially as you have aging boomers, baby boomers, or older generations getting to a point where they're moving out, their kids aren't necessarily living around them. That it could make sense. I could see the appeal, right?
Yeah. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it is like,
Yeah.
there's varying differences in investors and what an investor is. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to define
True.
as
Yeah.
both an industry and also,
Yeah.
an administration. What investors are good faith investors, and what investors are the ones we maybe want to exclude from this conversation, right?
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason, we really need to have good conversations between industry advocates and the government, right? And I
Yeah.
know FEA does a lot of advocacy work, and state advocacy is becoming such a bigger thing. And I think
Mhm.
that's the big piece here,
Mhm.
is making common sense decisions that make sense for both mortgaged
Yeah.
and consumers.
Mhm. So, you had mentioned Davos, too,
Absolutely.
which is happening
As we
as
speak.
we speak.
As we record.
Yeah.
So there may be a little future one of us hopping in here
Yeah.
to update this. But
Yeah.
as of now, Trump has spoken, and
Mhm.
a lot of the expectations around housing were not discussed. There was a lot of assumptions that he was going to name a new Fed chair. We were going to hear some of his solutions. We didn't get any of that in this speech. We had
Seems
a
like
lot of
a
other
weird
stuff.
place to talk about domestic housing policy, too. But
You know, It is what it is.
Yeah.
But I think that's a bigger question, right?
Yeah.
If you looked at the Housing Wire page and a bunch of other industry publications this morning, they're saying industry rates are kind of fluctuating in the morning,
Yeah.
right? Because they were waiting for this speech to happen, and we haven't gotten anything. There was a
Yeah.
chance that maybe something will pop up in the next 2 days. Well, if that does happen before this goes out, we will.
I
notify
would
you.
say with the slight dip in rates, there has been a pickup in activity. We've seen
Yeah.
a pretty significant one over the last few weeks. Hopefully it continues, but we'll see. The market doesn't like volatility, and we're probably in for
A lot of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And I think that, purchase applications are up, right? I think that's important. But the question becomes, do those actually become realized loans
Yeah.
at this point? Can people find the homes in the price
Yeah.
point they're looking at?
I had a friend ask me yesterday, he was at a 6.7. I didn't do that, but that is his interest rate. And he's getting asked, his loan officer says, "Oh, I could get you at a 6.1. Should I do that?"
Yeah.
And that is a decent switch. There could be a case for that to make sense,
Mhm.
right? And I didn't have all of the fees, everything in front of me. I basically said, figure out your payback period, figure out how long it takes for you to recoup any of the refi costs.
Mhm.
And depending on that timeline, it could be worth it or not, right? If you recoup
Mhm.
your costs in a year, maybe. If it takes 5 years, probably not, because you might have another refi opportunity then. So I also told him to send me more information and I can give better advice. But that was kind of what I kind
Yeah.
of my take on it. Yeah, with the information I had in front of me.
Yeah, and I think that points to the piece of really, I think, how lenders can have those conversations is you really have to be so informed right now. You have to be aware of, what is the point where you want to lock,
Yeah.
right? One is that dip, because there are these dips that are happening
Right.
as things happen in the market.
Yeah.
Is what is your low enough dip? And then just decide what rate you're going to go.
Well, that's like anything else. You're not necessarily timing the market's going to be next to impossible.
Mhm.
So once to your point, you get to a point where it's kind of good enough.
Yeah.
It makes sense to go for it.
Yeah.
So.
It's like, oh, I'm cool with the 6.1. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Lock it.
Yeah.
If it pops off, lock it. Right.
Yeah. And if you have that shorter payback period, even if you have to refi again in a year or two, you could still make money. You still wouldn't be losing money necessarily. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there may be a lot of refinance opportunities in the future. So I think lenders right now that are investing in programs where they can automate those rate drops and all of that. There are some great tools out there. We partner with a few of them for closing costs to do those calculations.
Yep.
So I think that's a big piece as well.
Mhm.